I want to begin with a story this morning. I had a friend in college who eventually became one of my roommates through the time. And he told me after we'd been roommates for a semester plus, he said, I just want you to know, I didn't like you at first. I said, why was that? And this was before we were roommates he was talking about. He said, because there was a girl that I was interested in that was interested in you. I said, you didn't even know me. He said, I know, but I didn't like you. And I thought, you are so dumb, okay? Why in the world would you make that kind of conclusion when you didn't even know me? And so I wonder, have you ever experienced that kind of prejudgment about who you are or what you're about before somebody even knows you? Well, it can be pretty frustrating to relationships. And this morning we're going to be talking about this kind of judgmental spirit that we see in David's wife, Michal. So question 1 says, we all carry expectations through our lives. Some we are aware of, others catch us by surprise. Those expectations can have huge impacts on relationships, especially marriage. What are some of the ways that expectations have affected your relationships? What are some ways that expectations have affected your relationships?
Not any instance in particular, but when you have, personally, when you have expectations of someone in a relationship that you haven't voiced, that they don't know that you have that expectation of, and you get upset when they don't meet that expectation, that's not a real good situation.
No, it is not. I'm glad you're just talking in hypothetical this morning, Mike. There's nothing personal going on there. Yeah. Let me give you a classic example. This is an example I like giving to premarital couples. You got, I'll give them make-believe names. You got Susie, who is very responsible. She is a straight A student. She does everything by the book. She is very organized, does things in order. And she is drawn to this easygoing, carefree young man, Bobby. Give him that name. And Bobby, he doesn't take anything very seriously. But she's drawn to him because he kind of makes life fun for her. And he's drawn to her because he knows he needs some kind of structure in his life. And they date and they get married, and they're into their honeymoon days just for a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden the lawn needed to be mowed 3 weeks ago. But Bobby is out fishing with it, getting ready to go fishing with his buddies, because that's what Bobby does. Okay, and Susie, because she's organized and she wants things done with structure, he gets ready to leave, and she says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm going fishing with my friends." And she said, "When are you going to mow the grass?" "I'll get to it sometime." And she's just stewing, saying, "I married an immature boy." Now, she may even verbalize that, okay, if she gets frustrated enough. And he goes away frustrated because he says, "I married a nag." Okay? What's going on there? Expectations. Sometimes they're verbalized, and as Michal said, sometimes they're not. And so expectations, I think, have a lot to do with the story of Michael. Does anybody else want to share hypothetically about expectations?
Sometimes we have high expectations of others, but we really don't look at ourselves. And I may run this, Teresa was in a line at Hobby Lobby, and some lady was complaining that she'd been through 3 husbands and hadn't found the right one. And I wonder if she was looking at herself and trying to make herself the gift instead of trying to find the gift.
Mm.
And so those, or be the gift, and so our expectations need to kind of, at least first, be inward focused, I guess, on what we expect of ourselves.
I'm glad you shared that, because I think that's a really good introduction to Michael. Okay, so let's begin reading about her and what we learned from her. So 1 Samuel chapter 18, somebody read verses 20 through 29 to begin this morning.
Now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David. When they told Saul about it, he was pleased. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law. Then Saul ordered his attendants, speak to David privately and say, look, the king likes you and his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law. They repeated these words to David. David said, do you think it's a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I'm only a poor man and little known. When Saul's servants told him what David had said, Saul replied, say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies. Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time elapsed, David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number of the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days.
And 20, okay, that's 29. All right. I find it interesting. David's here and he says, it's not a big deal to be the king's son-in-law. I'm just a poor guy and little known. This is post all the women saying Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his tens of thousands. So he's not even conscious of his fame and renown as he goes through this. So in an effort to get rid of David, Saul offered his daughter Merab in marriage if David would fight the king's battles. After Saul gave Merab away to someone else, David got a chance to have Saul's younger daughter, Michal, for the bride price of 100 Philistine foreskins. She was sort of a consolation prize. Saul even considered her to be a potential snare. Did you catch that? Mm-hmm. To David, until Saul realized that Michal really loved David. How would it affect you? I guess this kind of primarily from female perspective, how would it affect you to have your father see you as Saul, apparently Saul Michal? She's consolation prize, and she'll be a snare to David. Ladies, how would you?
I just got, thanks a lot, Dad.
Okay.
Now I know what you really think of me.
So even though there might be pain, you might try to laugh it off and present it that way. How would you feel? Because all of this plays together in what happens later on.
I wonder if she's been raised that way. This may not be the first time she's been told that.
Okay. maybe her dad has made her aware of the way he sees her.
Okay. Saul, ultimately Saul was all about himself. I mean, he's not looking at the interests of others, even his own family. I mean, it's all about what's best for him. And if he can promise this daughter to have David potentially killed, then he's using his daughter in a good way for him, because it helps him with things.
Yeah. His own insecurities have caused him to have no reservations about using his daughter for his own purposes. That'd be pretty tough, I would think, as a daughter to be treated that way. That, you know, dad sees me as the downfall of the guy I love, and dad wants to use me for his own purposes. That'd be tough. So what are some possibilities as to why Saul may have portrayed Michal the way he did? Why would he have said, yeah, I'll give Michal, I'll give Michal to David and she'll become a snare to him? Why would he have seen her that way? What are some possibilities?
Maybe she's very argumentative or, blunt.
Okay, he'd been around her enough to know what her personality was and know that she's a little tough to deal with. Okay?
Maybe she's a lot like him.
Okay. In what ways? Interestingly enough.
Prideful, insecure, combative.
Jealous,
Easy manipulated.
easily manipulated. Yeah. And this is why what Brent said earlier is so meaningful, because he was talking about how people were not aware always of themselves, but they were aware of other people. And so Saul might have seen it in Michal, but not realize it has an origin somewhere in Saul himself. So again, there are a lot of reasons. He may have seen her ability to deceive, that she had expectations of a husband that David didn't match up to. I mean, he could have seen a lot of things but the bottom line was he thought she could help bring David down.
Maybe he only showed her Hallmark movies for all of her life, and she was expecting love at first kiss.
That would be torture. What father in his right mind would do such a thing to a child?
But another possibility is he's holding her out as like a carrot on a stick to prompt David to do something, such as go out to the Philistines and get killed.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not something inherently wrong with Michal, but he's just using her as a pawn to tempt him to do something and get himself killed.
That's right. And that certainly is part of the picture, because he says, hey, you got a second chance here. I'll give Michal to you. You get to become my son-in-law after all, but you have to go kill 100 Philistines. The reason I think there may be a connection between Saul and Michal is because of what we're going to read later on in the account. So let's turn to 1 Samuel 19. Somebody read verses 9 through 17. Got a lot of reading this morning, so somebody jump in.
Sorry, 9 through 17.
Yes.
Now there was an evil spirit from the Lord on Saul, as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the harp with his hand. Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence. So he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Then Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, in order to put him to death in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be put to death. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went out and fled and escaped. Michal took the household idol and laid it on the bed, and put a quilt of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with clothes. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Then Saul sent messengers to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me on his bed, that I may put him to death." When the messengers entered, behold, the household idol was on the bed with a quilt of goat's hair at its head. So Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me like this, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped?" And Michal said to Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I put you to death?'"
Okay. Saul is actively trying to kill David now. He is not hiding his disdain for David. To her father's chagrin, Michal helped David escape, put an idol in his bed as a deception, lied about David being ill, and lied about David threatening to kill her. She became a snare to Saul's attempt to destroy David. She didn't become a snare to David at this point, but a snare to her father. But I can't pass this by, this little piece that's inserted here. What was an idol doing in David's home? Now, there may be something I'm missing, but just at face value, why would an idol be in David's home?
Could it be a trophy he took in battle?
Maybe. I mean,
Said
what
it
we're
was a
doing is
household idol though.
That's true.
we're speculating here, and so there's not a right or wrong answer because the Bible doesn't tell us. But I'm going to speculate in just a moment because it has to do with, again, Michael. So it might be that it's something he was attached to whenever that he got in battle somewhere. But I don't think so.
I mean, of course, we don't know, but I would kind of think it's something that she brought along. It was something that was hers, something that meant a lot to her, that it says ours, so it's something that I would think that she brought there into the home. Not maybe, but.
Well, and again, this is speculation, so I'm not saying this is gospel. This is Dale's opinion. I truly doubt that the man that is described in Scripture the way David is, in relationship that he has with God, I doubt that it is there because of David. I even doubt whether David even knew about it. What I imagine is that it revealed Michal's half-hearted approach to God, which is apparently similar to her dad's approach to God. Hey, let's cover all the bases. We'll worship Yahweh, but let's have this idol kind of as a backup plan too. And so I'm suspecting that that's what's going on. You'll remember this shows the kind of the duplicity. Saul had put a law out about witchcraft. What was the law? If there are any witches or the practice of witchcraft, those involved will be put to death. When Saul was desperate and he couldn't get Samuel to give him any answer because Samuel was dead, what did Saul do?
Witch of Endor.
He turned to witchcraft, to the witch of Endor. Again, family dynamics there perhaps going on that were affecting the way Michal approached life. So turn over to 2 Samuel chapter 3. Somebody read verses 12 through 14.
Then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." "Good," said David, "I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me." David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins."
Okay. To kind of fill in some of the blanks between where we read and what this says, Saul gave Michal away to Paltiel. In a similar fashion that he'd given Merab away, kind of held her out as a carrot to David and then gave her away to someone else. When David was on the run as a fugitive from Saul, Michal was given away to Paltiel by Saul. David's first request when he and Abner worked together or toward reuniting the kingdom was that Michal be returned to David. Why would David make such a request? There's a lot probably in this. Why would David make such a request?
I mean, she was a family tie to Saul. Maybe he was trying to solidify something there that, he's after him to kill him, and, maybe he would stop pursuit.
At this point, Saul's out of the picture. Okay, but your point is still correct, that Michal, being from Saul's house, would have been an effective symbol anyway, at least a symbol of uniting the kingdom, rather than Saul's side and David's side. Hey, we're bringing the two together into one kingdom. What else may have been going on?
He may have really loved her.
Yeah. I mean, let's go with what may be the most obvious thing. He may have just loved her. I mean, she did rescue him, help him escape. There may have been a genuine love for her here. What else? Kind of the flip side of that, he may have viewed her as a threat. Maybe she had ambitions of being queen from Saul's side, and that would have kept them from uniting. But he was invested in her. Again, he had put himself in danger to get her in the first place, right? So whatever the reason, he made this demand before. Don't even come back to me. I'm not going to let you see my face unless you bring Michal back to me. And that's what happened. Abner did bring Michal back to David. Now, jumping into the heart of the issue. 2 Samuel 6, 16 through 23. Somebody read those verses.
The Lord came to the city of David. Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. And then all the people departed into his house. And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself."
Can you read that again with some dripping sarcasm?
How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, and one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself.
Okay.
And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all of his house to appoint me as prince over Israel and the people of the Lord, and I celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day.
When David finally brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, he worshiped God in a partially naked frenzy. To Michal, it was lewd and shameful. It certainly was not something that her father would have done. The Bible says Michal despised David for it. What does it mean at the end of the passage, verse 23, when it says that she had no children to the day of her death?
She withheld herself from him, is what it sounds like. Maybe.
Or
Maybe so.
he withheld himself from her.
Okay. You all are getting into the personal dynamics that could have been going on for sure.
But also the Lord may have just prevented that to end that.
Yeah, and so it appears, I think, that the fact that that was inserted right there, what's it telling us? I mean, for a woman in that day, what was the significance of bearing a child?
It's shameful.
Especially if you're the king's wife. Why?
Not yet.
You gotta have an heir. I mean, what was it, King Henry VIII? And he the one who Anne Boleyn and
Yeah.
am I remembering history well enough? Yeah. You can't bear a child for me. Off with your head.
A son.
I bear a son. Yes. Yes. So there's this expectation that a woman, a wife, would provide that kind of heir for the throne, and yet she was not able or allowed to do so. I read God's judgment here because of the context. Because of the context, it's talking about this, if you will, dispute between David and Michal. It was a religious dispute, right? Michal's perspective was what?
Idols. Maybe. Certainly not God, or she makes it seem that way.
Okay. Her perspective about what David had done. How would you characterize her perspective about what David had done?
What was said was, well, first of all, she was jealous. Number two, that's not what my dad would have done. My father would not have done that regardless, right or wrong. So that's what she said.
She's embarrassed
Well, what do we learn from that?
about her.
She was more concerned with public opinion.
About her, nothing is about the Lord. Nothing that Michal said anything about the Lord. Just like Saul. You know, like you said, maybe he's at his backup, need to, but it wasn't anything about the Lord. And I agree with what you said. That's put in there, because evidently that was the Lord's will. She put her out to their children.
So Michal's perspective was a king has a certain dignity he should have about himself.
So
A king should present himself, image, okay, reputation. King should present himself in a certain way in order to lead the people. And as Mari pointed out, she said nothing about God.
Well, what you're seeing from David is the fact that he is a man after God's own heart. He just laid it all for the Lord and in humility and nothing about him that was all about God. And she didn't like that. And so it was, that it was, I mean, if your husband has that relationship with God, it should be a man of honor. And she saw it as something else.
Yeah.
She wasn't taught to worship that way.
Boy, we're moving into maybe things that touch on things today now, aren't we?
I'll take the other side. I mean, he was dancing naked in the street. I mean,
I'm gonna go on
come on, I
and
mean,
say, back the whole train into it. I think they were brought together more by lust and more by, I mean, she sounds like a little feisty spitfire. She'll go against her dad, she'll go against whoever, because she's selfish like him.
You've been teaching high school too long.
I teach literature. But they do this, I mean, they have a little bit of a twisted relationship anyways. But I think there's genuine, they kind of like each other, but it's not maybe by the right reason. He's this way, she's that way. And then when you have this, I mean, David might be a little known to be a little dramatic at times. But again, she saw it as,
They didn't have the
you can't do
foundation.
that.
They didn't
So
have a
they're
strong
just always
foundation,
against
so
each other, never for each other.
little things got them.
But I want you to really focus in on the heart of their difference, okay? Because that's the key. For Michal, yes, this was a lewd and undignified display. She was born to nobility. She was born in the king's home. David describes himself even as an ordinary dude. I'm an ordinary dude. All right? This is not the way kings act, she says. David says, I don't care how kings act. What did David care about? I care about praising God. Who was right? According to verse 23.
Well,
There was no judgment in the way we did it by anybody but Michael. God must have found favor because it's not mission that God was upset.
In fact, one of the things that kind of bothered Michal was the young women who were watching, and they admired him for that. You say, well, maybe it was lustful admiration. That's not what it says.
I feel like that's how he felt like he needed to worship. You know, it's like no different than somebody raising their hands or getting down on their knees or taking their shoes off. Seen it all, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's different than what I may do or whatever, but obviously it's not wrong.
God never condemned it,
Right.
but he did condemn her with no children.
but he did condemn her with no children. There's some significant application here, I think. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. The verse 23 seems to intimate that this was God's punishment on her for not having the same passion for God and for rebuking David for his passion. So question 7, some people may see Michal as a victim, a pawn used by her father. Others may see a conniving or jealous wife, insecure about her relationship with her husband. What do you see in Michal, and what are the lessons we learn from her life? And please don't miss the biggest lesson, which comes out in the passage we just read in 2 Samuel 6.
I think she's a little bit of it all. She was manipulated, she manipulates, I mean, she's kind of maybe been treated this way and saw that from her father. And that's her expectation of how a king should be. I mean, if you're king, then this is how you are. And definitely a different raising. But I think the ultimate thing is it always comes down to what's really in your heart.
So what's the lesson about what's in your heart that we learn from life? Good lesson from bad gal.
What we, as we read later in Kings, you know, it's about serving the Lord with all your heart. Serving the Lord, not others, not yourself, but fearing the Lord, serving the Lord, and doing right in the eyes of the Lord.
I'm gonna just share what I wrote here. I think the number one lesson is to have passion for God above your father, above your husband, above yourself. Most of Michael's decisions seem to serve her own wants and interests. I don't see much relationship with God.
I was gonna say, it goes back to what you read in First Samuel when, you're anointing David, and he's not the one you would choose, it's just like, God doesn't look outward appearance, he looks at the heart. And I think that's the difference, is that David has the heart, and Michael took it as the outward appearance, and not looking toward God at all. Just, you know.
See, this could be a disruptive, disturbing passage for a lot of people. Because it challenges me if I'm someone who's uncomfortable with someone who seems, by their actions, passionate about God, and I'm not. Maybe I'm very rational. Okay? And I love God with my mind. But this heart stuff is a little bit uncomfortable for me. These people who are heart lovers, they could just go overboard a little bit. Anybody? I mean, am I knocking on anybody's door? What?
It goes both ways.
Yes, it
People
does.
who are reserved and just sit there, and you're making assumptions that they have no passion for God.
Yes.
And yet, it goes back to worshiping God the way that you feel that you need to be worshiping God. That's why we have so many different churches where you can pick, how it is that you want to worship God and feel comfortable.
Yeah. But what Michael did, and this is where the title of the lesson comes from, what Michael did is she, rather than seeing David's passion as a wonderful, good thing to emulate, she saw it as a reason to have contempt for him. So I look around and I see, wait a minute, you don't approach God the same way I do. You're nuts. You're undignified. You're too stoic. Whatever you're too that's different from me is the kind of attitude, judgmental attitude that Michael had. So what does that mean for us today?
Anytime somebody doesn't do it our way or the norm, we judge.
We're at it. Should we?
No. But we do.
Now, why? Why do we do that? Why do we do that?
Because we weren't raised that way. It's different.
And,
Well,
and
and
my way of
sometimes
being raised was obviously the right way.
Exactly.
Sometimes we have found that somebody has been fake and they have betrayed us. I mean, so we've had a bad experience with somebody that's dramatic and there's been nothing there.
Yeah.
And so.
So we think it's fake.
Well, you also have to make sure it's not against scripture. Because that's a different issue.
Well, and Kirk even brought this out. David being half naked, dancing in front of the crowd, especially the young servant girls, at first glance, wouldn't seem very dignified for anyone, let alone the king. But apparently, God loved it. That's what's kind of disturbing.
Dale, you don't see yourself doing that?
Yeah.
The problem is, we're interpreting what we see. God is interpreting what he knows.
Say it again.
I said, we're interpreting just what we see. God knows. And there's a difference.
God knows what's in the heart. We look at it.
We're just seeing the outside.
We look at it as the exterior because that's all we can see. We don't know what's actually going on in the heart, but God does. That's right. So we should probably let God take care of that thing too, rather than saying, you're fake or you don't really have a passion for God. Whatever, again, the perspective that we're coming from, which, as Samantha says, it goes every direction. You know, in fact, these kinds of judgments, they reveal more about the person making the judgment than they do about the person they're judging. Over the years, I have been called ultra conservative. I have been called ultra liberal and everything in between. Now, how can I be all of those things? Well, it didn't say anything about me. It's telling you something about where that person is coming from. But yet, we use our own standard, the way we were raised, in many cases, as the measure of right and wrong.
Or our personality.
Or our personality, yeah. I mean, many of you remember Dr. Crouch, right? Leon Crouch? Could you see Dr. Crouch doing what David did? No, it'd be a little. Don't let your mind go there. Okay, don't let your mind go there. You know, you think Dr. Crouch wasn't passionate about God? Because he wouldn't have done what David did? Dr. Crouch was very passionate about God. But he was also a very stoic and an emotionless man. And so if I'm somebody, and I'm going to tell you, this is significant to me because I've always felt like, in fact, I'm going to tell this now, and it probably was. Dewey once accused me, this is early on in our relationship here. He accused me, and I think he was teasing, partially. He accused me, he said, "You're a closet Pentecostal." You're a closet Pentecostal. That's what he called me. I feel like I have grown up by nature to be this very passionate, emotional being, but who grew up in a home and in a church circumstance that was very staid and calm and stoic, and you didn't show emotion. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of both of those. And all I'm saying today is, whatever perspective you come from, don't assume that that's the only way to express passion to God.
Well, and another thing is love God without abandon, just don't care what other people think. You're pouring your heart out to God, not them.
That's right. And that's what David did. Dignified, or those of you who were in the early assembly, I referred to what David's reaction was after the child of Bathsheba died. People looked at what David did in that circumstance and said, "You're confusing us. I don't understand. What are you doing? The way you handle these things and your relationship with God don't make any sense to us." Did that make it any less pleasing to God because people didn't understand it? I don't think so. I think probably God found great meaningfulness in the first thing David did after the child died. David would worship.
And I think that's part of the main problem. She cannot understand that worship and that extreme humility he has before God.
Yeah.
She just can't grasp it.
I think the lesson, when we judge someone, especially in how they're worshiping God, if we, from our actions or our words, we could hinder that person's ability to worship God in some way by our actions, by our words. And so, I think that's the real harm we could do.
And to build on that point, what about raising our kids? Do we put barriers on them? I'm asking that question myself too.
Yeah. Yeah. It raises some questions, doesn't it? That make us a little bit uncomfortable, doesn't it?
But there's gotta be a line, right? I mean, if someone starts taking off their clothes, that's sarcastic, but I'm just saying, that's what's hard about this whole conversation. Is there a line? Is there, they can't go too far, you know, how they worship.
And was she exaggerating, you know?
Yeah.
With her words about that.
But that's why I said David was known to be, I mean, no matter how much he liked Michael or how he was drawn to her, he went out and killed 100 Philistines. And, you know, I mean, he was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. I mean, he just kind of seemed to be a loose cannon, sort of. You know, I'll do anything. I'll take it. I'm not afraid. I'm competitive. I'll do it.
And God
Liked
loved
it.
him for it.
Yes.
That's the thing. For those of us, again, who may be from more staid backgrounds, it's the fact, it's not the fact that David did those things. We see people do those things all the time, and we say, those guys are a little bit nuts. It's that God loved it. That's the part that I think disturbs some of us. Wait a minute, God loves what David did. How does he see what I did? So, in our relationship with one another, we don't want to be judgmental. Okay? Maybe there's something to be learned from people who are different from us.
Another lesson that I thought of was to honor your husband, because
Very
I
good.
listened to, you know, Caleb music with instruments, and David just can't. I mean, he can't worship that way. It's not pleasing to him, and you know, I go with what makes him comfortable because I love and honor him. You know.
I think that is another great lesson about being sensitive, not to your own preferences, but how does it impact the people that I love? In this case, a husband and wife relationship. So there are a lot of lessons about the dangers of being judgmental. And so I hope that hope it's been helpful in that way. And I hope you all will have a blessed day. We'll see some of you in the second scene.